Welcome to CBTS Tech Talk inside the CISO's office. I'm the producer, Lance Hart. I am joined by CBTS expert, John Brueggemann. He's our consulting CISO. And we have a special guest with us today, Roger Grimes from KnowBe4, Data Driven Defense Evangelist. John, let's jump right in.
Great. Thanks so much, Lance. Roger, I appreciate you joining us here today inside the CISO's office. And I was interested to hear your take on what it's like to work for a large, let's say, software provider, well-known organization, and what is it like to work on cybersecurity and security architecture, which I understand that was your previous role?
Yeah, I worked in Microsoft for 11 years, and they're I don't know if they're, I think they're a Fortune 10 company, very large, 200,000 employees, millions and millions of customers around the world. And, everything that you could think of at a small level becomes a lot more difficult at scale. I mean, I remember one of the first lessons I learned, we actually early on discovered this problem with services that would run in Microsoft Windows. Somebody discovered that if you could take control of one service, you could take control of the entire computer and every service in it. And it was something architectural, like you couldn't solve the problem without remaking services and how services work in Microsoft Windows. So this is probably about 15 years ago now.
That's a big problem.
We had a big meeting. Yeah, it was. It was interesting. It was something that was known publicly. Somebody that had worked or consulted with us had discovered it, and he had already announced it publicly. But we said, hey, could you just kind of keep it quiet while we try to figure this out? Because if the hackers start paying attention to this, they're just going to compromise, millions of systems. So that was a big all hands meeting for all the security architects. I was kind of brand new. And we were trying to figure out how to solve this problem without breaking a whole bunch of software. So I remember that I came up with this solution. I was so proud of myself that, it completely fixed the problem and it didn't hardly break anything. And they did, they analyzed it. They had an internal team that came back and said, Roger, this breaks 1% of software. I'm like, great. And they're like, and they said, no, we would fire you first because 1% of software means tens of millions of people that would, have problems. And that's when I realized that at scale is a big deal. If you make a mistake or a problem with, a patch that causes problems, it could impact a whole lot of people, bring people down. And let me say conversely, the same thing would happen. I remember, again, this is kind of early on. I remember reading about one of our patches caused some problem. And let me say that when you read that a Microsoft patch causes problems, most of the time it isn't what Microsoft did. It's some third-party interaction that's really causing it, some antivirus software, some
video drivers, video drivers.
Yeah, and in almost every case, those vendors didn't follow the recommended guidelines of how you write that application or that driver. So it's not normally our fault. But in this particular case, and it was, I don't want to say a rarity, but, maybe 1 out of 100 patch problems can actually be tracked back to something Microsoft did. But this is one of those instances where something we did was what was causing the problem. And I was reading in the online forums about this, Microsoft's horrible. How could Microsoft do this? And I got inside of our internal forums and I'm like, listen, we need to get this solved. And finally, the head of patch management at the time said, Roger, we've looked at our telemetry, and this is impacting 25 machines worldwide.
25?
How much? Yeah, 25 out of hundreds of millions of machines. How much of our company should we stop to fix those those 25 people? And that's when I realized that everything at scale is different. Like even they would come up with a new Outlook feature, Outlook for web access at the time, or Office 365, and they're like, hey, we're going to add this new anti-spam feature. They're like, we're going to have to spin up 500,000 new virtual machines, just not for a new product, just for a new feature, in a product. So what I learned at scale where the problems were really bigger, they could certainly impact people. And you had to be really efficient. Like when you're managing tens of millions of virtual machines, as we were for Azure, people would sometimes ask me, well, how many machines does each administrator, use? And I'd say the normal metric in a lot of companies would be they'd have 1 or 2 administrators for like every 100 or 300 servers, somewhere in there, somewhere close. We were, one administrator in Azure would do tens of millions of images because you just had to automate and, instrumentate everything. You couldn't have a person that would go troubleshoot a particular server. Matter of fact, in Azure, I remember it went from, hey, we're not replacing all these servers if they had a physical hardware problem until the whole rack.
Oh my
gosh.
gosh.
A certain number of pizza units that were in a
Yeah.
rack that would go bad. To when I left, they're like, we're not replacing, they would replace them a 18-wheeler at a time. They'd back up this 18-wheeler full of one use units and plug it in, and they wouldn't take it out until a certain number of units had failed. Like it was, so when you talk about its scale, it was just really, really huge scales. Everything was big. Certainly, every decision was tougher because you really didn't want to impact your customers and give them a reason to go somewhere else.
Right. So would you say that it was, I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask the question anyways. Do you think it was easier or harder to implement security in that large dynamic environment?
As compared to kind of a small or medium-sized business, I think if you're talking about security inside the entity, I think it was a lot harder because you end up with a lot of towers of Babel within the company. Like, remember, I worked for Microsoft IT, kind of a subdivision of Microsoft IT, handling Microsoft security, but we also did public. I was in charge of the public PKI servers for a time. But, I remember one time I was given a project where, hey, Roger, we want you to create these group policies that greatly secure all our servers.
Yeah.
And so it was a multi-week project, and I studied all the settings. Like, okay, I've got this outline, this baseline that I want to apply. And what I found out is that the most that I was going to be able to apply was maybe 20% of the computers in the company because I couldn't touch the Xbox servers, I couldn't touch the Azure servers. So even if you had a really good idea about how you could secure something, there was more layers in different business units. So I think as you get bigger and you scale, it becomes really difficult, even if you have a really good idea, to implement that, globally across the environment. That was probably one of the bigger challenges, is that I wouldn't even have the authority to be able to modify these systems. And that was Microsoft IT, which I thought was fairly comprehensive. But I remember when I got through finally calculating it, the most number of computers I could impact in my organization was like a fifth, something like that.
Wow. So it's interesting. One of the things that I do with the customers that I help with their cybersecurity is I want to make sure that they have consistent policies across the company writ large. And I'm hearing you say that's not necessarily true, even at a large, well-known company like Microsoft.
Yeah, what you say is good, though. I mean, that's the goal. It's I would say that's one of the top sins of most organizations, is that there's a lack of communication across the environment, a lack of authority. Like a really common smaller scenario is patching, where someone will say, oh, this server got compromised, and you have two different groups who thought it was the other guy's responsibility to patch that machine.
It's your job.
Yeah. Everybody wants to blame the other guy, but you're like, okay, but we needed to get it patched, and why didn't somebody bring it up? I would consult for large organizations. I remember one time I found that one of the servers had been compromised. I forget what I was called in there for. It was some basic consulting on group policies, or maybe it was performance troubleshooting. And I found that one of the machines had been compromised, and I told their contractor that. He's like, well, that's not in our scope. That's not something we're worried about. I'm like, we need to be worried about it. So that would be, again, another, Tower of Babel thing where people are like, well, that's not in my scope, so I'm not even going to mention it. I'm like, we need to go follow this down and get somebody involved. And that's what can happen if you don't have consistent policies, you don't have consistent authority, and if you have people that are in their own little tiny containers of what they think is what their job is, and it's somebody else's job to patch or something like that.
Most of the vendors, thankfully, and maybe because of my selection process, they didn't live in a container. If I told them I had a problem, they would work with me to solve the problem, even if it wasn't within their scope. So note to the wise out there, make sure that you have a real partner who's willing to not just go by what was literally, pointed out in the contract. And
that's exactly it.
And it leads me to a question about threats. I really was expecting you to say that, oh no, we had a consistent global policy for all servers that everyone had to follow, and that's a threat if you have a different security posture based on a particular organizational unit or a vertical. So that would be one threat. And as you think about threats for 2023, we're just getting started basically with the year. What do you see coming on the horizon for threats in 2023 for folks in the cybersecurity business?
So you ready for this? The same threats for the last 3 decades.
Oh dear.
The number one threat by far for over 30 years has been social engineering. Social engineering is involved in about 70 to 90% of all successful attacks. Unpatched software is involved in somewhere between 20 and 40% of successful attacks. There's certainly crossover in that. And then typically there's a third thing. And let me say that's changed. When I first got in computer security in 1987, it was Apple boot viruses, Elk Cloner, and then it became DOS boot viruses, Pakistani Brain and clones. Or
MBR, so Master Boot Records, yes.
Yeah, I would tell people, make sure you pop out your floppy disk before you reboot your computer. So the third thing changes. So social engineering, unpatched software, very, very consistent, will likely remain the top threats. Let me say, those two things compromise probably 90 to 99% of the risk in most environments. The third most likely thing that changes, and these days it's either weak passwords or shared passwords that have been compromised and then reused. And that's why you'll hear, the big thing these days is, you should use multi-factor authentication. That certainly is a good thing. I'm a very big believer and have talked about for years, telling people to use phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. Unfortunately, probably 90-95% of multi-factor authentication is easy to phish and get around or steal as a password. And the whole reason we're going to MFA is passwords are easy to get around and to steal. So if
can you say
multi-factor
let me real quick on I think a number of people would probably feel that multi-factor authentication can't easily be phished, but certainly as we have seen attacks against large, I don't know that it specifically was used against Okta, but we know that Okta had multi-factor authentication implemented, and it might have been credential theft or something else. What are your thoughts there?
Most MFA is trivial to socially engineer and pass. Matter of fact, the United States government since 2017 has said not to use MFA that can be socially engineered. Most of it, 90-95% of it is as easy to socially engineer or steal or bypass as a password. It's most of it. It's Microsoft Authenticator, it's Google Authenticator, it's any MFA that gives you a token, it's any MFA that asks you to approve the login. There's many ways that you can be phished, but the most common way is that you receive an email that you think comes from a brand that you otherwise trust, Microsoft, Google.
Maybe
Facebook,
your own company.
Twitter, your own company. And they're telling you need to log in for some reason, and you don't realize that you're clicking on a bogus rogue link. And that takes you to what's called a man-in-the-middle website, or the official term is the rogue transparent proxy website. But what it does is it's a man-in-the-middle site, and it connects you to the real place that you thought you were going to in the first place. So now in between the client and the server is this hacker's man-in-the-middle site.
Okay.
And everything you type in, so your MFA code, your fingerprint, if it actually gets transmitted to the server, your one-time code, whatever it might be, the hacker can see. And then anything coming back from the real website that's transmitted to the victim, they can see. So they don't know that they're in a fake website because everything looks normal to them. The only thing that would look different is that the URL would be different if they actually notice that. But they don't notice it, and so the hacker is able to capture that information, the 6-digit code,
right,
whatever it might be. Or what they many times do is just capture what's called the access control token cookie.
Yeah, the token.
Every time you log into a website successfully, your browser gets this text file called an access control token. It's essentially your driver's license saying that you've logged on successfully. Now you can move across the website. The hacker will capture that, disconnect your session, and then take over your session. And let me say, it's really, really common. It has been done tens of millions of times. Every popular phishing kit. So most phishing emails and stuff are done by these automated phishing kits.
Yeah, it's become a tool for the criminal actors out there.
You don't have to be a hacker to do it. It's part of the tool. They realize people are using multi-factor authentication. So again, the United States government has said since 2017, and the presidential Biden executive orders in 2021 and 2022 said stop using easily phishable MFA. And I tell people you shouldn't use it. And that, it's anything again where you have this code that you type in. It could be push-based authentication where you say, okay, It could be anything that's sent to your phone to a phone number is phishable. The SMS phone-based authentication is not authenticated really well, and I can fake your phone number. And so my saying for people today is, anytime you have to log on in, if you can use phishing-resistant MFA, and if you're not sure what that is, if you go to my LinkedIn website or anybody emails me at rogerg@noble4.com,
Okay.
rogerg@noble4.com, I've got a list where I call my list of good MFA that's strong that you should use. There's lots of it out there.
So some of it's like token, like a YubiKey or something that's a physical token that you're talking about?
Well, let me say, I can fish around most tokens, but if they're FIDO enabled, so like if you buy a YubiKey, it can be FIDO enabled or not FIDO enabled. Most people don't implement it in the FIDO mode, and it's just as easy, but they don't know. And so they implement it without FIDO.
Okay.
FIDO, FIDO.
Right.
That is phishing
Not the dog.
resistant. People will think biometrics is phishing resistant. It isn't. I talk to MFA vendors every week, new MFA vendors, existing MFA vendors, and they're shocked to know how easy it is to hack it. And let me say, again, it's Google Authenticator, it's Microsoft Authenticator, it's Duo. I love Duo. I got stock in Cisco because of Duo MFA, but it's all easily phishable. Let me say, they have less phishable, phishing resistant MFA,
right,
but people just don't buy it. And let me say, Microsoft's getting better, Google's getting better, but right now most of the stuff you're using is easily phishable and hackable. And so the problem is most people, when they go to MFA, think, oh, I'm protected, I can't be hacked. And the problem is that you can be hacked just as easily as if you were not using that MFA, or it doesn't matter that you're using the MFA. And so you still need to be aware of what you're clicking on and where you're going to,
right,
and when you type in stuff, that's the problem.
Well, and the other thing that a lot of people probably would experience on a more regular basis, certainly I have, if you have an Android phone and you're logging into your Gmail account on your laptop, you can set it up such that, the Gmail prompt will say, bring your phone close to your computer so that I can use Bluetooth for, secondary factor of authentication, assuming you've turned on multi-factor authentication. And the Apple platform does it as well, where if you're logging into iCloud or something, it will push out a notification to your iPhone and say, hey, are you trying to log in from this location, when you have multi-factor authentication turned on. So we could actually probably have a whole session on multi-factor authentication, but we've got more to talk about than just that, of course. So when you think about your environment and you think about staffing, how were you able to grow your staff? Where do you look for talent?
Yeah, let me say at Noble4, which I've been with for 5 years, which I just love, my favorite job ever. And I'm not just saying it because I work there. It truly is a fantastic job. And
your boss is listening.
That's right. But two things why I love working there is, first of all, they really do try to promote within. I forget how much of the staff, but in a given year, it's like 30% of people get promoted. If you want to be promoted at our company, there's a really good chance you're going to be promoted. It's they do a lot of hiring externally, but there's more internal promotion than I've ever seen anywhere. It's actually a metric. And we also say that half the employees have to be women and stuff like that. It really is kind of great that way. But the other thing that I love, and this was not at Microsoft, but there's a ton of coaching. Like whatever position you're in, there is a ton of an official person. We have official positions that are coaches, and they tell you how to do your role and your job better. And if you go, hey, I want to be a manager, they literally have a coach that helps you become a manager. And
wow.
There's classes, and it's in-person coaching. And, I don't know, a lot of jobs I was at, and let me say Microsoft, maybe a bit, it was a different thing. There are a lot of people gunning for you at Microsoft.
Really? So it wasn't like all for one and one for all. It was, I'm trying to ace you out of your promotion, Roger. I want your job.
Yeah, or it would be tough. And if you made a mistake, there'd be finger pointing and why did you do that? It's not that way at Noble4. There is really this, hey, we're trying, if we help you succeed, the company succeeds. And if they see a weakness, they literally go address it, but with a coach. And they literally meet with you and say, okay, what's going on here? Maybe, if you're a salesperson, maybe you're not hitting sales quota. And they're like, okay, what are you doing? We got a pretty reliable thing here. How do you do it? or if you're an IT guy that's not responding in a timely manner or something like that, like literally, there's lots of ways that you can say something's not happening that you're happy with, that you're dissatisfied with, and they're not trying to fire you. They're literally trying to coach you. So I was in none of my jobs, not just Microsoft, but in my entire life, I was never had this coach that would say, this is how you perform it. Like I'd be promoted and then kind of expected to do this job. Or maybe
we promoted you because we think you can do it.
Yeah, or a lot of times I was doing the job before they even promoted me for a year, right? I wouldn't get paid or anything.
Yeah.
At KnowBe4, they literally promote you, and then you have a coach that tells you how to do your job, and then they're constantly looking, and they're not trying to fire you because it takes time to rehire people and get people outside.
Sure.
They're trying to help you succeed. So I got to tell you, I've never seen any place like it, and I think it's wonderful. Every company should have what they have.
That's amazing to hear, and it's great to hear. I have to admit, in my several positions throughout my career so far, not even really a mentor, but I had someone who helped me understand the culture of the organization that I started working for, because it was a different culture than I was used to. He didn't know that much about technology, so he couldn't mentor me in that way, but he was like, this is what you can expect when we go here, and this is what you can expect when we go there. So he was certainly an ally in that regard. I know one of the things that you have in your LinkedIn page is that you're a security evangelist. And I kind of consider myself a security evangelist as well, because my organization where I was at previously got hit with a distributed denial of service attack in 2001 over a dual channel ISDN line. So it didn't take much to saturate that link. Let me put it that way. And then I recognize you're only as secure as your weakest link. So that got me on the path to security and improving security. What got you on your path, and how do you see yourself as a cybersecurity evangelist?
Well, it's a great question. And let me say, all I do for a living today is talk about cybersecurity issues and write about cybersecurity issues. And I write about a lot of different topics, everything from passwords and security awareness training, social engineering, hacking. I write a lot about quantum and quantum attacks. I belong to a lot of quantum boards.
Interesting.
MFA I talk about. But what it really came down to is a bunch of years ago, I noticed when I was at Microsoft that I would go into companies that had suffered major hacks, and I would tell them, oh, it's because whatever the problem might be. Oh, you have unpatched Java. For about 11 years, unpatched Java was the problem.
Yes, Java's bad.
Cisco had a report in like 2018 or 8. I can't remember which it was, but they said unpatched Java was responsible for 99% of all successful web attacks. I mean, think about it. If you solved that one problem, if you patched Java, you got rid of 99% of your internet risk. That's pretty huge.
That's massive. Yeah.
Yeah. No company I went to, after I went to them, I said, oh, you need to patch Java. I'd come back in 6 months or a year, they still didn't patch Java. They'd go, oh, I couldn't do it because it breaks this and it breaks that. And they were still hacked. I mean, so over 20 years, I maybe saw one or two companies that actually fixed the biggest problems that they have. And I would do reports. I'd put in red, like, this is what you need to fix. You need to fix Java, or you need to fix this misconfiguration, or you need to fix your access control, or whatever it might be. I noticed like nobody was doing that.
Okay.
And I'm like, why are people like why are they intentionally staying hackable?
Vulnerable.
They would get hacked again and again. They'd be fined. There'd be people fired, and they still wouldn't do it. And so I was like, man, I got to find out what's going on here. And I found out that it really, and I wrote a book. I ended up writing a book called Data Driven Computer Defense. It's almost third edition. It's sold over 50,000 copies. It just came to this collective thing. Oh, everybody is being told that they have to do everything like bubbles in a glass of champagne. And they're not being told that, hey, 2 or 3 of these things, social engineering, unpatched software, are really huge bubbles that are bigger than all the other bubbles. Matter of fact, 3 bubbles. If you had, and these days, if you had password issues in there, they account for 99% of the attacks. Yes, you can be hacked because of SQL injection attack, insider threat, whatever it might be.
Bad cloud security with exposed S3 buckets, things like that. Yeah, there are some other risks, but yeah, individual. Go on.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And then let me say, like the overly permissive S3 buckets. That's been a big issue for 3 decades. It's just now it's in the cloud. It used to be in your network. It used to be that people had overly permissive permissions on their NetWare servers, and then they had overly permissive permissions on their Windows NT servers, and now it's in the cloud, and it's going to be in the metaverse.
Yeah.
So what I found is that people didn't really understand the risk. Like they would be worried about meltdown and Spectre. Oh my God, meltdown and Spectre. I got to do something. When in fact, there's never to this day, 5 years later, been a single meltdown or Spectre attack.
Yeah.
But that didn't mean that you didn't need to bring the entire organization up and try to go tackle that problem, even though it really was. So you ready for this? Last year, there was over 25,000 exploits that you were told that you had to patch against,
right.
Depending on what you had. For the entire life of computers, only 2 to 4% of the total is ever exploited by any real world hacker against any real world target. So you don't have to worry about everything. You don't have to worry about 2 to 4%. And people go, well, what 2 to 4%
yes,
is?
Which are the 2 to 4% I have to worry about? That's the question they ask.
Yeah, so CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency at CISA.org, has a list of that called the Known Exploited Vulnerability Catalog. Known Exploited Vulnerability Catalog. And if you have to patch software, you should subscribe to this list.
Yes.
Because every time a hacker uses a new piece of software, they'll send you an email. And let me tell you, it's not Windows most of the time. It is, it's some type of router. It's your VPN. It's, some other type of newfangled thing or a component that's inside.
External facing asset. Yeah.
But what I would say is you don't have to patch 100% of everything 100%, but you need to patch that 4% 100%. And it's just that you end up, we tell everybody you got to be perfect at everything, like it's a compliance checklist. And again, what they don't tell you is that just a few of these things matter far more than the others. So that's what my security evangelism is, how to get you to focus on the right stuff so that you put the right things in the right places and the right amounts against the right things. Because the vast majority of companies, 99% of companies, are not doing it. Let me say, social engineering is responsible for 70 to 90% of attacks, unpatched software 20 to 40%, passwords involved in about 10 to 15%, and they overlap in the attacks. There is no company that exists today that spends 5% of their IT or IT security budgets to fight those three problems. And it is that fundamental misalignment that allows hackers and malware to be so successful today.
That dovetails nicely into really the next question. And obviously, I know you worked for KnowBe4. I used KnowBe4 in my previous career. I was a humongous fan of security awareness training, and I was, I preached security, and people were typically not terribly interested in hearing me preach about security. I can guarantee you that. They wanted to make sure that I fixed the printer. So how can security awareness and training help companies improve their cybersecurity posture?
Number one, realize it's a huge part of your risk. Like I keep saying, social engineering is involved in 70 to 90% of attacks. Well, I work for a company selling anti-social engineering services, right? I could be lying to you. I'm motivated to lie to you. What I can tell you is you will not find a computer survey that doesn't say, they'll have different percentages. Maybe they say 40%, 60%. You will not find a computer security survey that looks at root causes that doesn't say that social engineering is number one. So number one is, if you don't fix social engineering by using a best defense in depth combination of policies, your technical defenses, and training, if you don't do that well, the rest of it doesn't matter because you're going to be compromised because of social engineering. The number one root cause of ransomware attacks, social engineering, right? And that's by every single, I looked at 120 different papers. So concentrate on social engineering. And really it comes down to teaching to users two things. First of all, if a message arrives unexpectedly, I don't care if it comes in email or texting or chat or phone or in person or social
media. Or on Facebook
or
whatever. Yeah, it does matter.
Right. If it arrives unexpectedly, so you were not expecting it. And number two, it's asking you to do something you've never done before, at least for that sender. That becomes a high-risk event that you need to research using an alternate method, meaning that you go directly to the real website address or you call the person on a known good phone number, but you don't do it. Just because someone calls and tells you that you owe a bill or you got to pay a police fine or whatever it might be.
Or your nephew is, suddenly down in some, prison in Mexico and they need $500 wired somewhere. Yeah. Lots of social engineering opportunities.
Create within yourself, okay, is the message unexpected? Are they asking me to do something I've never done before? If so, I slow down. You don't perform the requested action. If you could teach just those two things, and we do it by, we give you training and then we do simulated phishing attacks. And if you fail the simulated phishing attack, you get more training. The idea is just to become a person that knows, oh, if it's got these two things in it, let me slow down. Let me hover over the link every time to see if it's going to the right place. Let me start to think about it. Is this something that is real? And if you make it within yourself, and then you help teach your family, your loved ones, your coworkers, you're going to create a healthy culture of skepticism where people are not automatically just clicking and doing things, even if they get called, even when someone comes up to the front of the house or whatever.
Knocks on the door.
Yeah, because scams are happening literally everywhere today, and scammers are making a lot of money. It mostly happens online. It mostly happens in email, but it's happening, like you said, in social media. It's happening with phone calls. Like in my area, I live in Tampa, Florida. There's a common scam where they'll call and claim to be from an electricity company and say, you didn't pay your bill and we're going to cut off your electricity. And if you don't go to the store right now and buy, cash cards
and scratch them off and take a picture and send me your cash card. Oh my God.
Yeah. And you're like, who could fall for that? Well, number one, they wouldn't do it if it didn't work on some percentage of people. But, it turns out it's about 5 to 10% of people fall for that attack. And, and sometimes it's not the electric company, it's the police department, or it's the tax company. And I actually talked to a couple of people. I said, why did you pay this fake electricity bill? And one guy's like, well, my mother, I was speaking to my mother, she had cancer, and I knew that they had made a mistake, but I didn't want them to come back to a house that, they didn't have electricity. Another person, well, my husband, he's always not paying the bills on time, and I figured he just missed one. And, everybody, there's different times in your life where you're susceptible. I am at times in my life susceptible to the right type of social engineering attack. But if I stop myself, go, wait, this is unexpected, and it's a new request that I've never done before for the electricity company or the police, stop. And let me say, everybody can be socially engineered. I get simulated phishing tests about every week, and over the 5 years, failed probably 5 or 6 of them.
Really?
It just got me where I was busy, or it was the right topic, where I was like, what? And I clicked on it. The good thing I can tell you is I don't think I've been successfully phished in real life ever, but especially since I've been working for Novo4, because I spot the real phishing attacks like ASAP. I just had one last week claiming that I owed a QuickBooks tax bill or something like that, and I used QuickBooks and everything. But I looked and went, oh, they never asked me to do this before. It was unexpected. Let me research. And it was completely fake.
Yeah, 2 simple steps. Think before you act. And the thought process is, have I ever gotten this communication from this person before? And then what are they asking me to do? Because there's always urgency in that request, because they need you to act quickly without thinking. And it's interesting, I get a number of, they call them smishing attacks now, the text messages. And originally those text messages were kind of silly in my mind. They were like, John, click on this link and your FedEx package will be delivered right away. And it's like, FedEx doesn't communicate that way to me. And, if I haven't ordered anything, FedEx isn't sending me anything. But lately I've been getting these simple texts from numbers. It's like, and all it says is hi or what's up. And I'm like, okay, don't know who you are, not going to respond. And I'm like, I guess it's a longer play on that phishing, to say, if you respond, then they either put you on another list and then they'll send you, some kind of more sophisticated.
Those are romance scams. They're hoping, and then it's a beautiful girl or man or something. And let me say, I've dealt for over a decade. I've helped people in romance scams, and the average person that reaches out to me to help a loved one or a family member or something, that person has lost $250,000.
Yeah.
And they can be really big scams, because I thought, like, I got really good at figuring out. I would reverse search the images.
Mm-hmm.
They'd send me up this colonel in the army or whatever. I was going, look, he's not a colonel in the army. He's a cook in Panama. Right. And here's his website. And you know what I found out? Never. When I showed the victim, and they were coming to me for help or a loved one, never when I showed them what the real name was and what the real person was, did it ever result in the victim breaking off contact.
Yeah.
Because love is a really motivating experience, and fear. right?
Yes.
Your Netflix account's being cut off, your electricity's being cut off. They're all fear, or my grandson. And by the way, I think anyone that scams an old person, a lot of these scam artists actually intentionally target
Yes.
older people.
Yep.
I think when we arrest them, that we should allow an old person to be able to whack them in the nose once. I know
Yes.
that's cruel and unusual, but I think there should just be double fines and a punch in the nose by an old person. That's what we should allow.
And it's interesting. I sat in a presentation at EDUCAUSE probably 3 or 4 years ago now, and it started out as a investigation into bogus phone calls through the switch that was being run by this university. And, somebody on the security team noticed it, and they started recording some of the messages because it was a voice over IP type phone system. It was an amazing presentation, and it was the same. It ended up being a romance scam where this poor woman had fallen for this guy who was calling her from the school because he had hacked into their voice over IP. And so it looked like the love interest was physically in the United States, but in reality was in, some other country over, it was either Africa or, the Eastern European section. But the romance scams really are very disappointing, to say the least. I mean, it really makes me mad. And it was interesting, when I was in my previous position, we had an invoice come in, and I had done enough awareness and training that the folks forwarded it to me immediately. They said, "John, this doesn't look right." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's correct," because this, it had the president's name as the name on the email account, but you looked at the email account and it was Hotmail or Gmail or one of those, and, pay this invoice immediately. I've approved this invoice. And so I did a little fishing on my own. I followed up, and then I said, "Oh, I'm here to help you, President, blah, 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 blah." And I said, we just need the routing information for the bank and your bank account so we can route this immediately for you. And they gave it to me. So then I called our bank, because I looked up the routing information, found it out was a subsidiary of the bank that we did business with. And I passed it on to them, and I passed it on to both the FBI and the Secret Service. And the Secret Service will help you very quickly with any kind of business email compromise, which we haven't really talked about, but it falls into that same kind of scam category. But business email compromise is extremely lucrative for the criminals, because very few people want to admit that they fell for a business email compromise and they paid an invoice that they shouldn't have paid. Have you had much experience with that?
After ransomware, business email compromises are the most revenue generating scam for attackers. And that was the case before ransomware. Ransomware is kind of temporarily taken over. And I assume as we take care of ransomware, business email compromise scams will be number one. But they're larger and more successful than ever.
Right. And they can be very lucrative. I've certainly heard of, good sized organizations that have paid $400,000, $500,000 invoices, and it was a scam.
I know of dozens of $1 million scams today. Dozens.
Yeah. It's
like amazing. And let me say, not small companies. It was Dell and some other people got scammed, by people. There are elaborate scams where a guy created a company with the same name in a different country so he could have the same name as the company, and he got a domain that was really
close.
Yeah, they were very, they were big scams. But the other thing I'll add just real quickly, like from the romance scams or whatever the scam is, if it's if someone's scamming me for my electricity or romance scam, some people would say, well, that's a personal problem. It's not a company problem. But if I'm embroiled in trying to recover from a romance scam, or someone stole money from me or my credit card, that's making me a less productive employee for your company.
True.
So, what you want to do is teach them how to protect themselves, their family, because that will lead to them protecting your company directly and also indirectly, because they're not dealing with as many issues in their life as well. It benefits everybody.
So have you found as a method to communicate risk to leadership of an organization to say, look, you've got this exposure because you're not doing an awareness and training campaign, you should invest, I'm going to make up some numbers. Let's say it's a $10 million a year company and they have a $500,000 IT budget. Would you campaign or lobby for leadership to say invest 5% of that $500,000 in awareness and training to mitigate risk, or would you do something else?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, again, I think the biggest reason why you're likely to be hacked is you're not aggressively training enough. There's no doubt in my mind. We have done lots of studies. I mean, the fact that 70, 90% of successful hacking involves social engineering. That's your data. If you look at ransomware, I did a ransomware report where I looked at 120 different ransomware reports, and the number one cause for ransomware was social engineering. There was some RDP and some other stuff in there, but it's social engineering. If you don't, and the problem is people are not aggressively addressed. If it's 70 to 90% of your risk is social engineering, I don't mean you have to spend 70, 90% of your budget at it, but probably less than a few percent. I mean, more than a few percent. People are just there. It's like, and it's funny, everybody knows that social engineering is number one, but if you look at IT and IT security budgets, it doesn't seem that way. So what is the amount? I don't know. I just think you should have good training, which should include simulated phishing. But however it is, if you can, there's lots of companies providing it. You can do it yourself if you want to do it yourself, but it needs to be aggressive and you need to test it. If you don't, a lot of companies, like when I was at Microsoft, they didn't believe in simulated phishing tests. Like, oh,
really?
It's a terrible thing.
They didn't believe. They didn't believe in that.
They didn't believe in it 10 years ago.
Wow.
I'm sorry, a couple of years ago. Just
okay.
A couple of years ago when I talked to them, they were still not doing it. But I think and I still have clients that do not believe in simulated phishing testing. That's crazy. Most people do it. Let me say another thing. We know for sure that training once a year, the average company, most companies don't do training. The ones that do training, they only do it once a year. Our data shows that it's as if you didn't do the training. Until you start to train and do simulated phishing at least once a quarter, there really is no significant demonstrable benefit. And really, you should be doing it once a month. Yeah. Again, it is the largest problem. And patching, that 2 to 4% of patches that need to be patched, you need to do it 100%. It's 20 to 40% of your risk. Those two things, fighting social engineering, better patching your systems, are at least 90% of the risk. But it's not being treated that way. People see the risk as each issue as bubbles in a glass of champagne, and they don't realize that two of the bubbles are really bigger than all the others. And so the better that a company can do to better patch and fight social engineering, the better they're going to do overall.
That's a great metaphor, and I think we'll end on that topic, and I'll just have a mental image of champagne bubbles popping in a beautiful glass of champagne, and I'll imagine that I'm, dancing with somebody and have a glass of champagne as well. Roger, I appreciate your time, and I think what we'll do is we'll put some links in the video to both CISA for their list for vulnerabilities that are actively being exploited. I want to, also emphasize and repeat what you said. CISA is a government organization that is working for us to help us secure our infrastructure, and they provide some fantastic resources. And if people wonder, as you said, there's like 25,000 vulnerabilities, they have a list of the ongoing vulnerabilities. Their vulnerability database is mind-numbing because it's so long. But like you said, their list of actively exploited vulnerabilities is significantly shorter, and it will help you, as they say, boil the ocean so that you only have to focus on the threats that are actively being exploited. So there's some really good takeaways there from CISA. And then if you have a handy slick or something that you want to have linked for security awareness and training, feel free to send it on to me and we'll get it out there and put it as part of the overall presentation. But Lance, I'll throw it back to you.
Thank you for joining us today. And as always, see you next time. Take care.